Thanks for making it. It's the third day of a very, very busy conference, so I'm really glad you decided to make it to this session. And I want to also start by apologizing on behalf of my colleague, Caroline Fisher, who unfortunately, she supported me in the preparation of the session, but she can't be here with us. Today she's not feeling really well today, so she stayed in the hotel, which is maybe the best thing. So I'm going to give you a little introduction. Me and Caroline, we are colleagues at the same university. But we have different focus. So Caroline's expertise is on the concept of care. She has done the whole research on this idea and on the idea of solidarity in societies where multiculturalism is becoming like a reality. My expertise is a little bit more in the field of design and the impact that design things, and of course design technologies, are having on societies at large. What we both do is working at this university, which is a university of applied science. This means this talk comes from academia, but very much from a special type of academia, where we're actually very much involved with our context and with our communities in the area where we work. A university of applied science, I don't know if that, maybe the same doesn't really exist in all countries, but the concept is that the research that we do addresses the challenges of society, that the teaching that we do has practical implications for the societies where we're based, but also that we aim to achieve impact in the places where we work, where the university is actually based. So the talk for today is not a classic academic talk. I'm not going to share a finished research project or a finished publication, but I'm going to very much share some work in progress that we're doing. And we wanted to make this very much an opportunity for us to have a conversation with the audience of a place like Republica. So the idea for today is that I'm going to use the next half an hour or so just to do a little bit an introduction to our work. I'm going to talk about the main question that we wanted to bring here in Republica, which is how do we translate care from an analog to a digital world. And then depending on how many we are and how much energy and time we have left, we might have an open conversation about some of the open questions that we are addressing ourselves at the university where we both work. So the decision to be a Republica was very obvious for us, for the work that we do. As I said, Caroline being involved in research around care and what it means to strengthening caring societies, and myself being involved on the impact of digitalization and design of new technologies on societies. The motto of Republica was for us really a call for action. We wanted to be here, we wanted to apply, we wanted to see who else was presenting, and we have been, in fact, very much inspired by being around the past 2 days and perhaps the rest of today. As we were preparing the talk, we had a couple of reflections on what we found to be the paradox of care, what we call the paradox of care. Is this idea that perhaps in a moment where we need to care more about care, actually care is increasingly sidelined or neglected. And this is because we cannot afford to add care in our work. That takes more time. That's one of the issues sometimes with care, or more thinking or more carefulness, or because it's unprofitable in a very, of course, market-driven environment like technology, as we're talking about that today. But we also wanted to address another paradox of care, which for us was this idea that, again, and Caroline is unfortunately the expert here, but we've been working on this together for some time. All the theories and practice, the practical approaches to care, have been developed mostly in an analog world. So the question for us is, and the challenge that I think we have, which I think has been somehow addressed in many talks here at Republica this year, is how do we address the challenge? How can we respond to the need of adapting care from an analog to a digital world? So I'm going to give you a little background about the work that we're doing at the university, how we understand care and why care is important in our work, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we've found out by starting looking into this question of translating care from an analog to a digital world. So the caring society is one of the thematic strategic area that the university is pushing forward. We started already for more than 4 years ago working on the question of care, trying to understand what care is and what is the role of a University of Applied Science in the middle of the city of Bern to foster and to advance or strengthen a caring society. What is this concept of a caring society? And we're doing different things, but mostly they have to do with promoting the physical, mental and social well-being of all people within the university, thinking about what is a university as a caring space, as a caring institution. But it also has to do a lot with doing research, so advanced theory, but also education and training on issues of care. And we do have students that come, that learn economics, that learn social sciences, informatics and design, of course, to whom we're talking from the beginning about thinking and learning and applying care as a practical concept, as a practice, as well as a theoretical concept. And I think if you think about the impact of education in this field, I mean, these are the people that are going to go out and work, of course, in the field, in many fields, including digital technologies at policy level, economic level, or perhaps designing and making the actual technologies that we're going to use. We think this is actually quite an important step, that we start to talk about education and how to include care at the educational step and in the first phases. And of course, we're also working with a lot of practice-oriented projects. So the concept of care that we take as central in our work is very much inspired by the feminist theories and the feminist practices of care. The seminal work of Fisher and Tronto on the idea of care as a human concern, as a life-sustaining and a life-giving principle. But we also look at care as a human need, as a empathy and responsibility as well, as we care about things, and as we take responsibility for things that happen in our society. And for instance, as an institution, as an academic institution, for the impact that we have on the education of our students, but also on the place where we're based and the people we work with. But care is also a range of practices. It's not just a theoretical concept, but it's actually a series of practices which can be very physical, when we care for somebody or where we care for something or where we care for nature or our built or natural environment. And again, as we learn from feminist theories of care, care is both, is a doing, but is also a commitment that affects how we produce knowledge. So it's really central in academic space, we think, and more universities perhaps should think about what it means to be a caring institution, but it's also about how we care for and about things in our democracies, for instance. What we aim to achieve is therefore to foster, as I was telling you before, through this program, this idea of caring societies, which for us are societies that develop a higher awareness of social justice, but also desire to expand the boundaries of who is included and who is excluded for these social justice discourses and practices. And it's also a society that has increased political recognition of the care work, that understands the care work as deeply political, including the diverse different forms of care and the different ways in which we can share responsibility for the care work. And we do look into economics model and look into the questions of unpaid work that happens a lot in care work, but also issues of pay equity, which we think are central in the work that we do. As I was telling you before, we have, Faculty of Architecture, we have design, we have theatre. The concept of space and place, and this is also coming a lot from feminist theories of care, is really central. Care happens in proximity. Care happens in physical spaces. And so we have been looking a lot at how the planning and the design of space actually foster or doesn't care relationship in a certain way. And we have been looking at how spaces have different access and people have different access to spaces and they can use them or not based, of course, on their social backgrounds and the issues of social inequalities. And we have been asking a lot ourselves again, What does it mean and what conditions are needed in order to create and maintain these caring spaces, putting the university at the very beginning very much at the center of how we understand a caring space and a caring institution. Now, the question for us, the challenge for us has been already before the call from Republic, of course, but how do we start rethinking somehow the role of care in what has been defined a post-place moment? How does care happen where healthcare is not happening in a physical space anymore, or in our homes, or in a hospital, or in a classical settings, and where other care relationship, you can think about the kind of going online of a lot of our academic work during COVID-19, for instance. If you consider education as a care work, then thinking about how the digitalization of education, the complete digitalization of education, what did that mean for care in a post-place society? So the question that we wanted to bring to Republica is exactly how do we advance care as a fundamental contribution and as a responsibility in the digital space, as most of what we've seen has to do with the analog space. And we have identified two areas. The first one is the areas that deals with the digitalization of care functions in society. These are the things I was talking to you about before. So is the digitalization of education and teaching, is the digitalization of other care functions in healthcare, of course, massively, but also in social care. With a lot of the issues which are going on in that space that we have seen, of course, for instance, regarding the increase of existing inequalities exacerbated by the digitalization of care functions, but also the building of very and completely new forms of inequalities that just happen as a result of care functions being moved in the digital space. But the one we wanted to talk more about is actually the question of forms of care and new forms of care that we have been starting mapping through our research in the past few months, which have to do with, therefore, new forms of care in the digital world. As we address or try to address this question in our university, and this is again an effort that we're doing across different departments and bringing, of course, different people and expertise, including students, of course, and staff, not just academics, is really thinking what is different about care when it's moved in the digital space. And there's things which, of course, would translate pretty much well, but there's also other things which would emerge which we think are new and maybe specific of thinking and understanding care in a digital context. And the things I want to talk to you a bit about today are these two main points. So the first one is this idea of data and Datafied and care in Datafied societies. And the second one is a little bit more into the work of designing technologies with care, or technologies that care. So the first thing I brought you is a bit of a definition of this word I have in the title, which is this idea of Datafied society. And this comes from the work of different scholars who have been defining Datafied society through their work, and the impact, of course, of data and datification in our societies. But what I think mostly they try to depict is three fundamental shifts that are happening, which are described through this concept. The first one is that, differently from any previous time, of course, data is now collected continuously through every action, also the most intimate action that we do. And sometimes data collection is the point of our action, so it's done intentionally, but most of the time it's actually a byproduct of something else. We're buying something online, we are booking a session, we are recording, we are listening through these digital devices to a specific talk into one of the stages. This is producing a series of data, of course. That is also is a byproduct of the service that we're all using right now. The other concept that goes beyond this idea of datafied society is that this data is incredibly huge amount of data is amassed with the idea that it can be used to make sense of our societies. So the assumption behind the datification, this continuous collection of data, is that data can shape and tell us what is knowable, but also what is valuable. And finally, the third assumption on the concept of datafied society is that this process of datafication is actually happening in a passive way and sees us as citizens object of the process and not active subject of the process itself. So the datafication idea and the idea of datafied society really describes this kind of space where we are represented and treated differently because of the data that has been collected about us, from us, and has been used perhaps to profile us in different services that we might be using, private and public. So when we think about what it means to care in digital technologies, we make an argument that we should really start by thinking about care in data. And what does that mean? To care about data or to care for data? Because a lot of the technologies that we're using very much starts from the premise that this vast amount of data is actually available and is collected. And the way in which we started looking into this topic ourselves, and also based on the literature that we've been considering, is really looking at different ways and moments of care through the whole data life cycle. And I'm not sure you can read what is in the different bubble, but I'm going to go through a little bit more details in some of them. So the first one is like what has been for many, many years given as an assumption. This data is collected, somehow magically flows into becoming a huge data set that makes sense, is built and can be used automatically. And the labor, the amount of labor that we're calling like the care labor that has gone and goes into actually producing and maintaining these large data sets has gone for many, many years completely unnoticed. And we have to really thank the work of many scholars and also, of course, investigative journalists who have actually started raising the question of how is this data, how are these data sets actually produced? It doesn't happen automatically, but it is the result of underpaid labor that is most of the time done somewhere else, not in Western countries, not in the main countries where these technologies are actually conceived, designed and built, but it's done like in Kenya or in other South American countries, where humans are used to actually do the very labor-intensive work of labeling different images or different content that they see in different ways. And this is just one example of how, again, finally also like the press has been kind of paying attention to this form of care labor that most of the time goes unrecognized. The second point that we wanted to highlight, and we find it again increasingly in the literature, is these issues of care in treating the data. Data doesn't come, and we know it now. We haven't really talked about these things for so long, but data doesn't really come like already in a usable way. And the data, and if we only look at the data that we have without questioning and addressing, for instance, the question of bias in that data, then we are missing a point. And we are not paying care, we are not paying attention to building more inclusive data sets. Data justice or data feminist approaches would also tell us that whenever we look at data, we should even look at the data in a data set. We should look first and foremost at the data that is not there, to really look at the data that has not been collected. And this is, again, is a care labor that might take more time, but it's fundamental, we argue, to really care more about data. And of course, we have learned how important is the impact on the environment, not only on society, but definitely on the environment. Every time we need to build new data sets because we have amassed an amount of data that needs more space. And we have had a few talks even here at Republica during these days. But this is, of course, like becoming a reality where more and increasingly more like local communities are really paying the price and becoming aware of the amount of energy, how resource intense these data centers are, which again is a conversation that we have not had for a long time. And that is actually now happening more and more. So it's about water, but it's also about energy as well as space and many other resources, of course. And we're only looking at the resources used for data centers, just to build the data centers. There's way more to be said. And finally, one that we wanted to also point at is this idea that care in data or for data or about data also means to think like, what else can we do in using the data for other purposes? perhaps for public interest purposes, once we have collected this huge amount of data, and how can we move and motivate or force different people and different actors, including corporations, to share some of that data and so that it can be used again for the public interest. And forms of data solidarity and data altruism are interestingly developing and becoming more prominent as we talk about and we expand the concept of care to the field of data. The second area that we wanted to talk about is this idea of care in digital technologies. And this is a lot of the work and a lot of the thinking comes from the work that I do with students who work in design, and some of them, not all of them, but will be working in the future in the design of digital products, be involved with corporations, but also in public sector to support the design of digital products. And care in these instances means, again, when it comes to design, the design of technologies, different things. The first one that we need to think, and we kind of introduced in our teaching, is this idea of designing technologies with care. Designers have been guilty for a long time. This was something they were learning in schools, how to design for obsolescence, how to design products that were getting old fast enough so the new products could come into the market. And with digitalization, this has been obscene, the level of this. So really thinking about rediscussing and reconsidering, also with our students, how can we talk to them and teach them to think about repair and design with care for technologies that can be repaired, so they can have a longer life. But it's also about designing technologies that care. And the picture you see here, I don't know if any of you is familiar, is from a really interesting tech workers movement. And there's few of them now that are active out there, which started really questioning, from their point of view, how can we become more aware and care more for the type of things we design and the type of things we produce, and perhaps say no to certain things that might be produced, that might be used with our help, in ways that we're not, that will have an impact on societies that we do not agree with. So this is an interesting movement, and again, we are teaching students and really thinking together with them, what does it mean perhaps to not design? What does it mean to not build something if we think about, if we care about the impact that these technologies will have? And final, and I think perhaps one of the most difficult, how can we really design technologies for care? And by this here, we mean technologies that can foster caring behaviors online instead of the toxic behavior that we increasingly see happening, of course, in the online space, and not only, but definitely exacerbated in the online space. And again, those toxic behaviors are most of the time like the result of certain design choices in the design of those platforms and those technologies. So thinking about how can we undo that, how can we do it differently and design for care to foster these behaviors is really like another key questions that we're asking ourselves. So I'm going to share a few principles that we've been developing before we can maybe move into a little conversation. So we've been reading and talking and discussing a lot between us in the university. What does it mean? So what does it mean? The question that we're bringing here to Republica, what does it mean to translate care from the analog to the digital? And these are some principles that we've been identifying. I said it already at the beginning. Some of the principles of care will be the same, and we will have to actually think explicitly about how do we bring them in the design of new technologies. But we also need to be more aware and start thinking about new principles and new ways of caring that just emerge as a result of digitalization. And my point on actually on the issue of data is definitely a point that it goes in that direction. One thing that has helped a lot, and together with other scholars, to think about care is really this idea in digital technologies, is really this idea of materializing technologies. As soon as we understand that data is not just a thing that is done with no work, but requires manual labor, as soon as we understand that these technologies have an impact on the environment, we can really understand what it means perhaps to care. These kind of forms of care materialize. we think it's really important that digital technologies should, and companies who produce these technologies should really explicitly clarify the purpose of care in their technologies, but also that they are that we pay more attention to the power relationship in this environment, as well as developing an understanding of care that is quite pluralistic, to really cater and care for the need of different people that are using the internet and are using digital technologies today. This is, as I said, very much a digital conversation, and an ongoing conversation that we're having in the university, and I'm very aware that we have very little time left. And I'm open to questions if we think this would be a good use of the time that we have, but I also brought you some questions, and maybe we can have a discussion in the little time we have left, as I wanted to really understand why you care and why you came to this session. Are you already doing anything in this space? This is really important for us. And what should be done? What you think, what have you been inspired to do? What interesting things you've heard around in Republica these days, and what we could do as academia? As I said perhaps at the beginning, it's a bit more of a call for action for us to find partner and to find people with whom to continue a conversation. So thanks a lot for listening, and I'm here for your questions or for discussing these questions together.